Hello and welcome to Connecting Life and Faith. Today we want to talk about reading. It's no secret that we as a staff love to read. Joe pushes us to read all the time. We think it makes us better people, better Christians. And so between Caleb and Joe, they have actually read almost 200 books in 2016. So I just want to pick their brain a little bit. So guys,
We would clarify read and listened to.
Oh, and listen to.
But leaders are readers. And the day we stop reading is the day we stop leading. And our leadership is diminished. And so that's a good part of the drive is our personal growth. And then by extension, our leadership growth. So
that's huge. So how about we start, guys, with the books you've read this year, maybe your favorite book or, what you've been reading, maybe a theme in your reading this year you've seen. How about you?
I did a lot of audiobooks through the years. So for me, I found it hard to do like doctrine or Christian living books while doing audiobooks. So I did a lot of different novels, all different types. Currently, I'm listening to The Three Musketeers, just a classic.
that Three Musketeers, and there's 1, 2, 3. Nice. Any similarities?
Yeah.
Never mind. Go on.
No, so for me, I was driving a lot, so those books tend to be easier. So whether it's a Christian-themed one like Ted Decker does a lot of novels, also did a lot of Tom Clancy novels as well.
So does one stick out in your head like, man, had been my favorite book this year?
You have to look at your list.
Yeah, I do. I would.
We'll also clarify that when 2017 starts, they'll both be releasing their top books of the year for 2016. So that's a hot read. I know everyone's excited about it. Looking forward to that. So how about you, Joe? What have you been reading this year?
Well, I try to read a variety of things. Caleb likes reading fantasy, and that's not anything that grabs me. Christian growth type of books, leadership type of books. In the spring, I read one that was very good. Turned the Ship Around by a Navy captain that took an underperforming ship and turned it into one of the top performing ships in the Navy. And just his leadership principles. Prior to that, I'd read a comparable book called It's Your Ship by a Navy captain who had done the same thing with the USS Benfold. Also like to read books that expand my awareness of the world. Just finished a few days ago listening to one called The Poverty of Nations by theologian Wayne Grudem and an economist. And it was macroeconomics, but from a biblical perspective, and why nations succeed and fail, and the systems and the power of the free market, which of course our country's based on, and which is under assault. And so some great learning there. I find I'm inspired by true stories. The Chilean miners, the 33. I read that one earlier this year, and I got the idea from you, Jake, to read that one. That was good. So I often look for inspiring true stories as well.
That's great. So when you guys are going in to pick your books, maybe talk a little bit about the value that you try to seek in books, the inspiring stories, the theologians. You talked about a little bit, but it's not all books are created equal, right? There's good books and bad. So what are your values as you go and as you begin to pick and search through the books that you're going to read?
That's a great question. One of the things just for me is either A, answering a question, or B, capturing my imagination. Some of the questions, just the economics one. I love economics, and I read a very comparable book. I think you just finished it too, Why Nations Fail. And it's so interesting. Lots of men leadership books. I just finished 2, Point Man and Tender Warrior, 2 men books. What does it look like to be a man?
Godly man.
Godly man. And then the other side are more the novels that just capture your imagination and tell good stories. I think Jesus, when he communicates with people, tells stories. And stories capture our imagination, and we remember them better than a list of things that you should do type thing.
One of the things that's always intrigued me is when I hear somebody comment on a good story, and from a biblical worldview, you think of the story of the gospel. everything was great, and then the fall into sin, we're all in big trouble. A hero comes in and rescues everyone from their mistakes.
Yeah, where'd that come from? Right?
They live happily ever after, and that's the gospel.
Yeah.
And that's the premise for every good story. There's a problem, everything's good, then some problem comes in and fouls everything up. A noble warrior comes in for the rescue, and then there's the redemption and the great finish. And for Christians, Christ, of course, is the great Redeemer, and heaven is the ultimate finish. And so there's a reason why every good story follows that pattern. It's the gospel.
And where did you pick that up at, that insight?
I would have been reading something.
Reading a book.
Something also I'd like to talk about, as I said earlier, not all books are created equally. There's dangerous books to read. When I was in college, Love Wins was one of those books. People said, "Oh, that's a great book," but just because it's a good story or it captures your imagination doesn't
Right.
mean we should be reading it, right? Parents guard their kids from some books reading it. We as maybe staff would warn you against some books. So go through. Maybe have you read bad books before? Are there dangers in books? Should we worry about these things? And what wisdom should we go about as we pick our books?
That's a great question. Some books that come along that are heresy are couched in popularity, and everybody's reading them, and everybody wants to gravitate to them. And sometimes they're a passing fad, like the Da Vinci Code or Love Wins faded pretty quick because it was heresy, and nobody's going to grab onto that. And the author of that book has passed from the public scene. But yet they're not helpful in any way and have the potential to lead somebody astray. So people do need to be discerning as they read. There's one in particular I would point out. About 10 years ago, a book called The Shack was very popular. And it promoted a very unbiblical view of the Trinity and God. It was very much, I can create God in my own image kind of thing. God is what I want him to be. Now, I bring that up. That book kind of passed. I heard live an interview with the author. He's so sincere, the person next to me said. So sincere, and sincerity isn't a test of truth. I wanted to shout at the guy. But I bring up that book in particular because the movie is coming out in a couple of months. And somebody's already passed on, hey, this might be a good activity for the church to go and see this movie. And so it's not going to be. That's not worth your time.
In my own head, I've tried to assign some ratio of time to spend in the scripture versus time to spend extra reading. And you can't really do that. There's not really, 2 to 1. You can't assign some ratio or 1 to 1. But the point is just you shouldn't be reading any other book until you've spent time in scripture that day.
Absolutely.
Spend time first and foremost in scripture. And then with your other time, the scriptures include stories to capture your imagination. They include truth to apply to your life. That read scripture first and foremost, and then include all of those other things.
That's great. Amongst the three of us, when we talk about what are you reading, we're also talking about what you learn in your quiet time, where you studying in the Bible. And no reading should substitute for holding the Bible, reading the words of God to humanity. That would be number one.
So we're going to post, I'll link some of the books we did talk about, some of the ones these guys are excited about in the video. The best line, I think, leaders are readers when we want to read a lot. So we encourage you, parents, buy books for your kids for Christmas. Buy husbands and wives, share books, read things, talk about it, and grow in your faith, in your life, and be inspired in all these things that God's been saying. So thank you for connecting with us, and we will see you next time.